Welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We are changing topics once again to a discussion of H70, an act relating to inclusion of use value appraisal and served land inventory. And this is a committee discussion, largely to decide if we are going to want to continue taking testimony on this bill and or feel the need to vote on it. There's Representative Labor. Great.
Good morning, I am here.
Okay, welcome.
Morning.
All right, so does anyone want to kick us off on thoughts?
I'll go first.
Representative Tagovailoa.
I think our, what we had as far as testimony on the 27th, although I wish there were some other people who were able to come in after lunch to provide testimony, I think what we got was very good. I think the case was made for celebrating the conservation goals that UVA program has the goals that it had. It's wildly successful. I think because of that success and the goals of Act 59, I think we would be foolish not to include it, especially since the land put into the program far exceeds the land leaving the program. And if we were to find that there was a reversal, we would very easily be able to make changes like we do all the time in the legislature. I think because we have a stagnant economy in this state, because we have a lack of housing, I think it would be nice to have state agencies concentrating more heavily on housing and the economy. And I don't think that H70 is going to cause us to stop looking for lands to be conserved in perpetuity, but H70, I think, helps us reach a goal that we set. And I hope we come to a position here where we can vote this out favorably.
Representative Logan.
I can't support H70. The goals of Act 59 were to conserve 50% of our land by 2050, not have some undefined portion of that be in current use. And as there are development pressures, and those development pressures are going to increase in Vermont, not decrease over the coming decades, especially as we have generational turnover of property. We are going to see those development pressures result in that land being developed. And so I would not be comfortable counting any currently enrolled lands, UVA enrolled lands, as conserved lands. I do think that there's probably some solution there, because I think we can recognize the value of that those lands make to our landscape and to our ecology, but I don't think it would be appropriate to consider them permanently conserved lands, which is what we were aiming for with Act 59. So I can't support H70, but I do support the conversation continuing. I just don't know what the solution is. I think other people have good ideas about how to kind of thread the needle. I don't have anything to offer personally, and I think it's a much longer conversation than we can have by Friday. So, but I do hope that we can come to some kind of middle ground on this in Vermont.
Representative Pritchard.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of H70. I mean, I can appreciate what Representative Logan's saying, but the whole purpose of UVA was to conserve lands. That was their mission, to conserve lands. If you're in the program, that's what you're doing. 0.002% has withdrawn. So, and that's been throughout the the time of this program. So I don't see that happening. And the other thing, quite frankly, I'm concerned about, and I would like to continue with testimony. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to take this up sooner, so we could go through this testimony and be able to make a decision whether we can move this bill forward or not. And now we've deprived ourselves of that. But you know, part of what I got out of the testimony, and it's a great concern of mine from a couple avenues. One is the impact that it potentially can have on our forest industry. You know, they manage these UVA lands, and it's a big part of what they do. That could change, you know, under this 2050. There's concern for that because of changes in allowing that to happen. And one of the things that they do besides helping our economy is, you know, this forest regeneration is an important thing for Vermont. Our wildlife habitat is suffering because of a lack of it, and it needs to continue. And to put that in jeopardy, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't believe that H70, by approving it, changes the mission statement of all the other folks that do the good work, like the Nature Conservancy and some of these other Vermont Land Trust. They're still going to stick to their mission statement. H70 is not going to change their mission statement one bit. They're going to do what they continue to do. And I think it works in harmony, and it gives a real reflection of, I think, of what lands really we have conserved. And I think it should be included in that number. So hopefully the discussion, you know, again, it's unfortunate that, you know, we're going to run out of time, but I think it's an important discussion, and I hope it continues.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I'm just looking up the Vermont statute of the definition of conserved land. Conserved land means permanently protected and meeting the definition of ecological reserve area, biodiversity conservation area, or natural resource management area. So it's the word permanently, you know, I think that we're debating, and I don't see current use as a permanent protection of Vermont land.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I really do appreciate you allowing this discussion to occur this week. I know there was mention of that last week, so thank you for allowing this discussion. I think if you continue reading the sentence that Sarita started, she ended at a comma. After that comma, it says, or natural resource management area as defined in the section, although other long-term land protection mechanisms and measures that achieve the goals of BCD that are enforceable and accountable and that support an ecologically functional and connected landscape may be considered. So the UVA program perfectly fits into exactly that.
You might be looking at it. Are you looking at the statute?
Yeah, I'm looking at
So
statute.
just to be clear, it's true, it continues, and that's
I'm
important.
looking at it.
30% is the permanent, and then it softens a little in the 50%. I don't want to debate the facts here. Let's
Yeah,
just
look
stick
at
to
some
opinions.
items. It's on page 2, line 14 of the H70, which quotes the original 10 VSA chapter 20.01. And so given that, I think the UVA program perfectly meets exactly what Rep. Logan was looking for, that middle ground. It's conserved for a very long time, and not specified by a year, but specified by its difficulty with which you can pull it out. And it's though if we just look at the data, the record shows that the amount of land in UVA that is, and I want to truly call it conserved, because I think when some of the testimony we heard on Friday, when it was stated that only 27% of land is conserved, I think that that's really not a true statement there. Because it doesn't include UVA, it doesn't include land that is conserved in the use value appraisal plan. So I think including UVA just sets the record straight. It sets it clear how much land truly is conserved in Vermont. And it's quite a bit. And so we know exactly within the UVA program that exactly how much goes in, how much comes out every year. And it is only increasing over time. It increases over time. Roughly 10% per decade. It was 2 million acres 20 years ago. We're at over 2.5 million acres now in UVAs. And we know exactly if it's, so if that curve ever started to come down, we would immediately know it could react to that. So I think the argument that, well, it's not permanent, falls flat. I think that's completely satisfied. That argument is completely negated by the fact that we know exactly what land is in UVA and what land is coming out, and the amount coming out is always exceeded by the amount going out. So I'm strongly in favor of H70.
Representative Sakowitz.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm going to keep my video off just because I seem to have a somewhat unstable connection. I want to make sure you can hear me. I have two main thoughts. One is that, you know, the key to me for Act 59 is really the permanence. And so H70 is really all about undoing what is, for me, the essential point of Act 59. And I thought that Act 59 was a really groundbreaking and really important bill for Vermont. And I was incredibly happy to see it become law. And I am very hesitant to do anything to weaken the law. And especially so right now, when the law is still, you know, being implemented, when we are talking about right now exactly what it could look like in Vermont to protect the land that we're talking about protecting. And my understanding is that UVA is likely to have a role in that. We just don't know exactly what it's going to be yet. That's being actively looked at. And yes, UVA is a wonderful program and it has done great things for Vermont. And it may have a really big role to play in how we work through Act 59 over the coming years. At best, H70 is really premature in terms of its effect on Act 59. We're going to know soon enough what the likely role, what the possible role it will be for UVA in preserving land permanently. There very well may be a way to do it. I'd really like to see us, at the very least, wait until that process has run its course when we get the reports back and we have a much better understanding of how, you know, we can really go about this in a way that makes sense before we, you know, undermine the law at this moment. That's what I got.
Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just passed out page 723 regarding the land posting, and we came to a compromise. And I appreciated that. I think I've mentioned before that big changes are often not received very well by certain entities or agencies. They cause big change and upset the apple cart. But so I do believe in compromise. And this bill, when it first came out and I read it, it kind of intrigued me a little bit once we started taking it up. There's a couple of points here that we haven't talked about, and that is the 50 by 50 and including only permanently conserved land. I'm looking at potential costs for Vermonters to do that if we were going to add more permanently conserved lands. I think without using the land trust and UVAs, that it is going to have a big impact on Vermonters for cost. A lot of the UVA lands have been in UVA current use for 20 plus years. And is there consideration that the Act 59 permanently conserved is black or it's white, and to me, that's not a compromise. I'm looking, is there a way in the middle that we can consider those types of lands for conservancy? And perhaps incentivize generational owners. There is penalties for withdrawal, so we already have that in place. And so I am at least receptive to conversations. I'm a little apprehensive about voting on it today because of what I just stated about potential cost, potential how this might upset the apple cart, other testimony from people. And I am respective to Act 59 to Representative Sacker, which is reference to Act 59. Yes, the rules are being stood up and they're continuing on with Vermont conservation design. It may be a little premature to jump in now with this. I'm not sure, but I do like the idea of some sort of compromise. So it's not all one or the other.
Senator Chapin.
I guess I'll just start with the difference between use value appraisal and conservation easement, whether it's a temporary, medium-term, or long-term conservation easement. Conservation easement is an easement. It's a binding legal document on the future of land. It often involves, or maybe it always involves, so basically selling a bundle of rights. It's a completely different tool than use value appraisal, which is not a conservation program. It wasn't intended to be a conservation program. It was designed to fairly tax Vermonters who are stewarding land because there are a lot of public benefits to land stewardship that is often not, historically over the past 50 years, farming and forest products industry, the economics of those business models, because of our international food policies and trade policies, for various reasons, it's not as economically affordable to produce food and forest products here as it is to import them from other places, often at lower quality with bigger environmental costs. So Vermont has incentive programs to support those industries, and I am so grateful for the current use program. It would look completely different. It would look different. It would feel different. Our economy would be completely different. Our development patterns would be completely different without the current use program. I understand how people are conflating them. I totally understand when you look at the landscape, you think of these two tools because they are both having a significant impact on what Vermont looks like, how it feels, the fact that we support land stewardship in Vermont in a really real way, that it's been able to stay a big part of our landscape and culture in Vermont. And that takes work and incentives, unfortunately, given some of the broader influences. So I understand how people conflate these two programs, but use value appraisal is about taxation, and it's about fair taxation for current land use with an agreement for a 10-year management plan that people can get out of for a fee. At any time. And an easement on your property is totally different. Now in Vermont, we basically don't spend any public funding on anything other than permanently conserved. In fact, I think we don't permanently conserved land. So I think that a lot of this conversation is around the tension that Vermont doesn't have any medium-term conservation easement programs. We don't have any intermediary tools, and yet our definition around 50 by 50 enables potentially some shorter term. And I'm thinking like 50 to 100 years. I'm thinking, where are the medium term things that help us, particularly right now with baby boomer sell off of 80% of the land over the next, currently we're like in a decade where the vast majority of assets of all kinds are going to transition from one generation to the next, or even skip a generation to my children's generation. We're in one of the most significant, this transition of property and resources. It's going to have such an impact on what Vermont looks like. And if we could think about some tools that really help, particularly in that intergenerational transfer of land, and that is often where UVA falls apart and isn't necessarily the best tool to help with that. And it's also where the vast majority of our private forest land is at risk, is around that intergenerational transfer to the next generation. It's where the next generation might not live here, they might not be able to care as much or actively be involved in its management. So families often end up sort of utilizing that forest land asset to in a different way, and forest parcelization happens. And this is our biggest threat to the forest products industry by far, in my opinion, after working in this sector for 15 years. So I guess I just really want to say, I think we should have a long-term conversation about intermediary tools that might help us meet that 50 by 50. I'd love to have more testimony on that topic in the second half. I cannot support H70. It would just end Act 59. And Act 59 is essential for Vermont's vitality in the future, both ecologically and in terms of our human ability to like sort of be on this landscape. So I really want to see that process continue to move. I'm hoping that the stakeholders in that process are thinking about this question and looking at other tools beyond permanent land conservation that might be useful in that 50 by 50 and appropriate. And I do support the conversation and concerned about the conflating of current use and permanent conservation and where's the in-between tools. So yeah, thank you for making some space for this conversation. And I think that if we had time, I think we need to think towards next biennium. And get information from the stakeholders as I think the report is due back to us in June or July.
Representative White.
Thank you. I know I don't have the history with this bill that everyone else in the committee does, so I do want to be mindful of my role in addressing it. But I mean, it seemed to me like there was a goal set by the legislature, and what this bill would do is essentially kind of change the rules of the game to meet that goal. And I don't know I personally don't think that's an appropriate way to go about this. I agree very strongly with Representative Chapin's statements about the need to discuss intermediate measures of conserving land that may stretch for 50 or 100 years, but not necessarily in perpetuity. I think that's an important discussion to have. But right now, I would not vote in favor of doing anything more on this bill.
Representative Labor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. As you know, I'm a landowner. I am in UVA. And after listening to the testimonies from last Friday, there wasn't a single one. Even VPIRG, even your birding societies, none of them were against UVA as being a vehicle for conservation. What we're missing here is, in my opinion, the economic disaster that we'd be imposing upon the legal logging industry, which encompasses the hidden workforce that's in the woods, that's in the trucking, that's in the sawmills, which are diminishing because of lack of product. And that trickles down to much more expensive building processes for housing. You ship the round logs out to Maine or Quebec or New York for milling, then you're paying for it to come back, your own product. That's just not economically feasible over the long term. So that's a $2 billion industry in itself. There's nothing preventing recreational use of land in UVA. A lot of it started out as UVA and became trails. So I don't understand the word of it's not permanent. I can't understand that. The history shows it's only coming out at a very small percentage. And that is probably for housing. So, I'm going to support it because the history does not show it coming out more than it's going in, and it does not show any land use inappropriateness. So I guess I'm voting for it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you all for thinking about this and your thoughtful comments. I guess I'll just say that for me, this is a conversation that is happening through the Act 59 planning process, like literally as we speak. And the request is, so just to clarify, the definition of conservation is permanent for the first 30% and then durable for the next 20% that gets us to 50. Okay, so we're open to this conversation, and there's been great suggestions here and inside conversations about what does a medium-term conservation look like. And I know that the professionals who are working on this daily in their lives are engaged in that Act 59 process, as well as a lot of Vermonters engaging right now in a very impressive push for public engagement in the Act 59 process that's happening. And I would say I recommend, and it behooves us to wait for those recommendations coming back from the process and see where it lands. And if there is a need for a legislative or statutory change, I think maybe it wasn't enough in Act 59 to celebrate the role of UVA in conserving the forest products industry, but also our landscape and our ecology, the ecologically connected landscape that is the focus of it. So it feels like, of course, UVA is a critical piece in the conversation. And I'm actually excited that people want to have further conversations about what it means. But I would say now is not the time for us to change the rules of the game, as Representative Hoyt points out, in a process that is currently underway. We can take a vote or we can not take a vote. I'm not actually sure if we vote a bill down, if we can take it up again. So this is uncharted territory for me. I leave it there.
If I can just add a few more comments.
Representative Tagliavia.
We have UVA land. It's in passive management. It's not in active forestry. There's been changes with respect to UVA land. There's been a push for passive management or old growth. That letting H70 sit and stew doesn't allow for that passive management to be considered as conserved. We have, like I said, on the 27th, looking at the AMPs, we've got vernal pools and ponds. We've got forested wetlands, open wetlands that are currently in UVA that are also protected under statute with buffers and everything else. It's not considered permanently conserved, but actually in statute, it really truly is. There's a lot of land in UVA that's not given an account, and H70 would finally give it the seat at the table it needs on Act 59. And waiting, I think, ignores all of the parcel owners. I forgot how many there are, 20,000 or something, being part of the, having a seat at the table, being part of the conservation effort.
Yeah, we do have a witness waiting, Representative North.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Morris was saying, that the economic impact. While for current use, we're not actively paying any, as Rep. Jacob points out, paying for the current use land. It is being appropriately taxed for the current use that it's experiencing, which then when we add on the additional lands that are preserved in perpetuity and additional lands captured in Tier 3, which again is completely different than conservation. But all these things add up to taking away from land that can be used for housing and does a couple things. It increases the property tax burden on the remaining little bit of land that's left and increases its price for the mere mortal Vermonters to be able to afford. And thus making it very inequitable so that the extremely wealthy can come in and purchase this land, but Vermonters is out. It's just a continued encroachment and taking more and more and more land for whatever reasons, tier 3, conservation, current use, etc. Leaving less and less and less for Vermonters to use for themselves. And much of that land that we're talking about is already privately owned. It is their sole method of saving for the future. If it gets captured in one of those categories, it becomes less and less valuable for them. So it does, as Norris points out, have a significant economic impact for Vermonters.
All right, we really need to move on. Representative Chapin and then Austin, and then we're finished with the conversation.
I'll just say that I think Representative North brings up some really interesting questions. I'm not sure I agree with all the assessments. I think it's actually a really complicated topic about the economic impacts of these various tools and how they impact other Vermonters. And I think that if we wanted to explore that further, it would be really, I think our whole committee and some of the people who are in the room could really benefit from understanding that more deeply, because I've had some interesting conversations about that. So I think that could be an area that we just get a lot more information on to understand the complexity of those pieces.
Yeah. And I just want to remind people that Vermont just pays $74 million a year for the UVA program to contribute to that. 50 million of that coming out of the education fund. So I think Vermonters are committed, to that program.
All right, with that, I think we're going to shift gears and welcome our next witness.
Okay, so
We're
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to, yeah. Yeah, you could see it.
right. We are going to shift gears to H727 data center bill and J4.
Great, thank you. For the record, TJ Poor, I'm the Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. And first time in the committee this year, or this biennium maybe. I was here last year, but just as a reminder, Public Service Department has two roles. Where the State Energy Office, we issue the state's comprehensive energy plan in coordination with other agencies, and we're also the ratepayer advocate in regulated utility matters. So we advocate before the Public Utility Commission on cases that come before them, utility rates, different petitions, tariffs, et cetera. So, and thank you for the opportunity to come testify on H727. At a high level, the department believes really that the regulatory processes that govern the interconnection of large loads like a data center are pretty strong right now in Vermont. That said, there's areas where improvement and clarity can be helpful, and the bill takes a step in that direction. With appropriate guardrails to interconnection and service, there's actually an opportunity with data centers to benefit ratepayers and benefit Vermonters. And unguided data centers could risk a negative impact for ratepayers. So to that end, we really welcome the opportunity to work with the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee on language in the bill to provide a path, or to make suggestions that provide a path that ensure benefits to Vermont if a data center were to interconnect. So I thought today what might be useful is to briefly share some of the regulatory processes governing interconnections of large loads in Vermont, because you guys don't normally hear about those things, and that hopefully will be helpful in how you think about the bill. As I said before, I think our current processes through Act 250 and through 30 VSA 248, which is our siting, energy site infrastructure siting legislation, are really strong. But clarification and improvements can be made to actually clarify jurisdiction and ensure those data centers are beneficial to Vermont. Right now, without any legislation, right, a data center's load or any load in Vermont has to be served by an electric distribution company. So Title 30 provides the overall legal framework for electric utilities. And it establishes the authority for the commission to regulate those utilities and issue certificates of public good, which are really then required for utility operations. And that includes constructing and operating facilities, transmission lines, any distribution lines that are new or need to be upgraded or improved because of a large load in interconnection. The service territories are exclusive, and that's maintained through kind of the history of regulatory decisions that helps kind of define that a load has to be served by an existing electric utility. And that's true whether service is taken at the distribution level, like your house, or at the transmission level served by Velco. For bigger loads, and this is kind of what we're talking about here, larger loads that would more likely connect to the transmission system, to like Velco's lines. I'm sorry, let me back up. For those loads, the smaller loads, the utility has to provide an ability to serve letter in order to, a customer comes in and says, I'm going to use this much load, 10 megawatts of load. The utility has to then say, okay, we are able to serve that, or we're not able to serve that without these upgrades that you must pay for. And so the cost causer pays is kind of the regulatory principle that a new data center would need to pay for like specific infrastructure upgrades. And that letter, when it comes out, that's really the formal confirmation that the utility has the capacity and infrastructure needed to serve. If the utility can't serve, as I said, the customer is responsible for all those infrastructure costs.
Right, I just missed a phrase. You say cost cause.
The cost causer pays. That's what.
Causer pays.
Right, yes.
The word causer lost.
Yeah, no, sorry. So just kind of the general regulatory principle that, if you're the one driving the need for infrastructure, you should actually pay for that. So that ability to serve letter that I'm talking about, and we'll start to get into an area that you all probably know more about than me, but it's often used to support Act 250 permits. So Act 250, as you know, requires that a proposed development won't place an undue burden on existing services and infrastructure. There's Criterion 6 specifically mentions educational service, but has really been read more broadly to mean all public services and infrastructure. There's Criterion 7 related to municipal services, and 9A is related to future infrastructure capacity. And so I wanted to bring that up, just that there's a nexus there from like that ability to serve letter and what the utility regulatory process, and then how it's treated in the Act 250 process for that kind of development.
But just to be clear, our energy projects right now, I mean, I suppose if it's like this kind of might or might not trigger Act 250 currently. Most of them don't. Most of what the Public Utility Commission and your work is focused on things that are outside of Act 250.
Right, exactly. Yes. So the electric infrastructure, like transmission, distribution, is pretty clearly in the PUC's jurisdiction. Electric generation, if there's any generation, very clearly Section 248. But a development, just like a general development of like a warehouse or like the other pieces of that development, still need to go through an Act 250 process. And so that's the portion where there's a nexus between that ability to serve letter and saying, hey, the utility is said we can serve this, if it was just a normal commercial development, the utility may say, we can serve this, and that is used as evidence, as I understand it, in criterion 6 as it relates to public infrastructure, for instance, in saying. So if a utility can serve the load or the customer is willing to pay for the upgrades, and it can do so either via an existing tariff or a direct contract. And all those types of contracts must be approved by the PUC now and must ensure that the customer is paying for all the costs that it incurs in the system. So, so that's like for smaller loads. For really larger loads, and this bill really talks about 20 megawatts and above, that it most likely would connect to the transmission system. So there's a couple of options for a large load to connect. One, they could use that tariff and contract process that I talked about. Green Mountain Power actually has a tariff on the books that is available to accounts who take service directly from the transmission system and are big. Those similarly, it was the previous tariff that Global Foundries used before they became a self-managed utility. And it accounted for a contribution to the embedded cost of the system, and it was intended and approved in that it was an equitable way to serve that large load. So that's one option. The other option for a large load now is to become a self-managed utility. This is what Global Foundries has transitioned to, is to become a self-managed utility. That also requires commission approval under several areas of Title 30, including 231 about the company itself and 248 for siting. I wanted to give that background before diving into at least the main component that I want to talk about at H727 about the large load service equity contract. So the H727 requires this large load service equity contract. It's kind of like the contract that Global Foundries had, but it provides more guidance and guardrails for what the commission will need to look at and ensure in order to approve that contract. And it's really, I think the intent here and the intent of when we made edits to the bill was to really ensure that there's no gaps in ratepayers being able to having to pay any costs associated with this large new load. That includes things like broad energy and capacity prices. There could be indirect effects, right? You could pay for the specific power that you have, but a large new load, say 100 megawatts, causes, draws energy from facilities in New England. When we have a concern in 5 to 10 years, do we have enough generation to serve our load without these data centers? And so we wanted to make sure the contract accounts for any additional costs, make sure that we have enough generation resources in New England to meet our winter demand needs. Things like upward pressure on prices generally from higher demand means, just basic economics, more demand can drive prices up. And so we wanted to make sure that the contract accounts for that. I think the changes that House Energy and Digital Infrastructure made included a lot of these pieces and really address these, both the direct costs and some of the indirect costs that that may happen from the interconnection of a large load. Another thing that the bill does is account for stranded costs, right? If a data center came and infrastructure was needed to be built, and then the data center went bankrupt or left, then the contract is required to account for that and ensure that ratepayers wouldn't be left on the hook. So the other piece that I wanted to just talk about, there's a number of other provisions in here that I think are good. It allows for contributions to the gross receipts tax, or requires that, just like any other load in the state, efficiency charges. It considers the requirements for load flexibility and has the commission looking at that. And so really, there's a lot of protections in here for ratepayers. The siting of the data center itself, our comments initially had said, let's not create overlapping jurisdiction between Act 250 and Act 248, where the commission may not be best suited to actually make rulings on things that Act 250 and the Land Use Review Board is better suited to review. Things like orderly development, noise, perhaps. So there is still some provisions in here that you look similar to land use type requirements. And I think for now, I think that's okay. I think there's still room for improvement for the bill that we hope to do in the Senate side. And it's better to have them better to have dual jurisdiction than no jurisdiction. But I think we could still work to clarify some of that. But I think right now that the bill is in a at least as it relates to the large load service equity contract portion of it, which is my area of expertise, that I think that bill is in a good place to move forward. So, I think that's it. I tried not to get too far in the weeds, but I wanted to give you a little background. So happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have one. You said it fills a gap, but then you said 20 megawatts or above, but we just heard that we already have data centers that are at the 1 megawatt. What about between? And could someone slip in at 19 megawatts or 15 megawatts? Or is it really limited to 20 and above? We're just becoming familiar with the bill ourselves. So is that the limit?
So the megawatt threshold in the bill for this large load service equity contract would be 20 megawatts. Below that, it would fall into existing jurisdiction, and there still would need to be the data center would have to be served by either an existing tariff or a new tariff by the utility that would need to be approved by the commission. And this is where I was trying to articulate that our current regulations are pretty strong in this area, right? Cost causer needs to pay, and so any interconnection. And there are real potential benefits from adding 10 megawatts of load in certain areas of the state. That could be a really good thing for ratepayers, particularly if they're contributing to kind of the fixed cost of the system that's already been built. And so that would, I think, be addressed in a commission proceeding. As I understand it, well, you may want to talk with somebody that's more of an Act 250 expert than I am, but most data centers 20 megawatts or above will need to use at least 10 acres of land. So they would all fall into Act 250 jurisdiction anyway. And then there may be, if there was a 10 megawatt data center and it was on 5 acres of land, depending on what town it is in the kind of governing jurisdiction, if it's a 1 acre town or a 10 acre town, it may not fall into Act 250 jurisdiction. And so I want to, you should check on that with Act 250 experts, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like the difference between what's happening now and 20 megawatts feels really big. And I guess I'm wondering two things. Do you support this bill? And do you think it's needed? You've said you think the existing structure is maybe adequate regulatorily. So first is, do you support the bill?
So we support the concept. Like I said, I think there's some things that some tweaks that we could make to better clarify the dual jurisdictions going forward, but I would support this. We support this being passed to get to the next stage to have those further discussions to make it crossover. And those, yeah. So that was the first question. The second question is it really needed? So I think we would be okay without the bill in general, but I think it's really useful to have that additional guidance and clarity for it's kind of an additional protection for ratepayers. And that kind of goes to why we support it passing. That additional clarity is good, it's useful, and it really helps with some of the maybe the indirect costs that could happen that could get lost in the shuffle and under the current regulatory process.
And one more, I see you, I will say, I'm just curious, he said it would definitely like probably take 10 acres. Do you mean of actual building and impervious surface? The building itself would be that big?
I don't think the building itself would be that big, but that's like the parcels that, from my understanding, that's the kind of the size, the minimum size for 20, that they need that kind of, that land, it not just the building itself. So
A few street trees
impervious.
along the edge?
What's that?
With a few street trees along the edge? Sorry.
I'm sure, yes, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Um,
Thank you.
I don't have a-
Representative Wade.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And you may or may not know this, but I was wondering, like, why is 20 megawatts sort of the magic number? I mean, was that just plucked out of the air, or is it like, are the data centers you see out west and stuff, are those comparable? I'm just wondering, like,
yeah, I
what it
mean,
is with 20.
yeah, I mean, the data centers that you're reading a lot in the news about are often, 100 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts, so really, really big. I think the 20 megawatt it's just kind of a size threshold. There's like the small ones that we have a couple of that are really like backup for operations on site. And then there's kind of the medium size that could be, medium may not be the right adjective there, but smallish size that are necessary to do like model training for if it's AI or other data processing, and that's kind of a threshold size in the literature. So
just wanted, I mean, and I guess another question is the costs associated, the use of resources, things like that associated with 20, like, are they significantly reduced in 19? I'm just wondering, so in 19, what's the difference between 19 and 20, and one's getting treated, a certain way and one isn't. So I guess my question is just, how big can they get before they sort of hit, like, what is the difference between a 19 megawatt facility and a 20? And you may not.
I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, can we just get a copy of your?
Yes. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Representative Tagliavia.
Just a couple of questions, just for scale, 20 megawatts. How many homes, or like city of Montpelier, what would city of Montpelier, really cold winter day or a really hot summer day be drawing?
Trying to give a good comparison. I don't know relative to like a particular city size, because we're, mainly utility territories. Like I don't want to make up numbers and get them wrong off the top of my head. I'm thinking of utility size and how to get a sense of that. Our peak load in 2025 in the summer was 855 megawatts. So for the whole state, we've been as high as around 1,000 megawatts, but 2025 was a little lower. And so if that gives you a scale from the statewide perspective, that, 2-3%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.